And what does that terminology mean? Because I mean, you're having to learn a whole another language when you start having to deal with trying to get out there and properly advocate for your kid.
100%. And for most families, they're coming at a disadvantage because these are professional jargon terms that professionals are using in the field of neuropsychology, speech pathology, special education, school psychology. And what's problematic, and I want most parents to really think about this carefully, is good evening, everyone. It's time for another episode of Dyslexia Discussions and More. And Stephen Yearout's going to join us today, and we're going to talk about terminology because there's so much terminology in learning difficulties. There's so many professions that kind of come together in learning difficulties that it just kind of behooves us to try to talk through some of the terms. And Stephen, I'm going to try to focus in the beginning 5 or 10 minutes just on like the beginner's intro. What are we talking about when we talk about dyslexia? So I've got a couple models we'll throw up. We'll talk through the models first to give us a way to kind of conceptualize what we're talking about, because some parents are just finding out for the first time that their child is struggling. I'm struggling to say that. And they're finding out there's some difficulties in their academics, and the child might be 10 and nobody said anything, or 15 and they seem to be doing fine, but now somehow there's a problem. And we'll just kind of talk through those pieces. How's your Friday going so far?
It's going pretty good. I think this is a pretty important topic, being that, we all know that this journey is a long journey. This is a marathon, right? This is not a sprint. And for those parents out there that are in the beginning stages of this journey, you find out that not only do I find out my child is dyslexic, but now I have to learn all this new terminology and try to make some sense of it. And, is it a real word? Is it a made up word? Is it something that, it's somebody didn't like that version of what it was being said, so they wanted to key a new buzzword or phrase.
Right. Yeah.
And really this is about deciphering what is truly terminology that you should be using, and what does that terminology mean? Because I mean, you're having to learn a whole another language when you start having to deal with trying to get out there and properly advocate for your kid.
100%. And for most families, they're coming at a disadvantage because these are professional jargon terms that professionals are using in the field of neuropsychology, speech pathology, special education, school psychology. And what's problematic, and I want most parents to really think about this carefully, is there's no license required to set up a dyslexia clinic. So consequently, we have hundreds of made-up things that parents are inundated with. There's hundreds of made-up websites. Unlike medicine, unlike OT, unlike psychiatry, unlike even psychology, if you pretend to be a psychologist, psychiatrist, or physician, or a speech therapist, and you're not licensed, your practice will be shut down because that is not allowed. But that helps parents to know that the person they're talking to is properly credentialed and has the proper skills and knowledge. That safety doesn't exist when we're talking about learning disabilities. There's no real restrictions on who can talk about it. There are restrictions on who can diagnose it. And consequently, it leads families to be inundated with so much more misinformation than actual accurate information. So let's jump into the first building blocks and let's look at, how does the language system build? Because dyslexia, after all, really is more than just reading, but the definition is reading. But it comes from spoken language skills first, written language skills later. So some common terms parents will hear when talking about reading problems. And let me clarify, there's two definitional names for this. There's a specific learning disorder with impairment in reading. And some people know that these are learning disabilities or specific learning disabilities. And there's three of them. One has an impairment in reading. One could have an impairment in written expression, like written composition, paragraph writing, sentence writing, essay writing. And the third one is a specific learning disorder with impairment in mathematics. So today we're just going to target in on the one, the SLD with impairment in reading, which is synonymous with the term dyslexia, except for dyslexia commonly also includes some spelling difficulties. So phonology is one of the first things parents will hear about, and there's many subterms of that. There's phonology, there's phoneme, there's phoneme awareness, there's phonemic awareness, there's phonological awareness. There's all these parts of this term, but know that phonology just means sounds. Phono means sounds. And here we're talking about not dog barking sounds, not a car's brakes screeching sound. We're talking specifically about the sounds that come out of our mouth to produce a language, speech sounds. So you'll hear about phonological processing, phonological words. It's all about how the brain is processing speech sounds. And we did this on a different podcast, so I won't go into this today, but know that even though it sounds like it's all acoustic, and people think that there's a real, connection to auditory processing, phonological awareness is not just an acoustic system. It's part acoustic, it's part visual, and it's part mouth movement and sensation of the mouth movement and awareness of the mouth movement and the ability to move the mouth to make a D sound instead of a B sound, instead of a K sound. And these four build together to build phonology. On the right side of that graph is pragmatics. And Stephen, if you're like typical parent, pragmatics is not a word anybody usually says to you. It's like, how's your child's pragmatic language? You're like, I don't know what you're talking about.
I'm sorry, did you just cuss me?
Yeah. And pragmatics, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, yeah, I mean, again, this is, like you said, this is something that you'd hear sitting across from, the wall of people at your art meeting.
Yeah.
And, this is really important for you to understand because they're going to speak in this terminology and it's speaking directly over your head. So, that's the main reason why we're going to really dive into this. So it's not the first time you've heard it. And
Right.
if it's not the first time, you truly understand what it means.
Exactly. And it's not the intent of professionals to talk over parents, but their intent is to use very clear, specific terms to explicitly talk about one thing and not another. Because we just say, speed of processing, for example, that's a term that gets thrown out a lot, or processing speed. That means a lot of different things. It's a term that's actually too vague. But phonology is a much more explicit term that means speech sounds of words. By itself, it's the number one predictor of reading skills at age 4 and 5. If you have problems of phonological awareness at age 4 and 5, almost guaranteed you will be having reading difficulties by age 9. Now, you may not have been diagnosed by them because our channels of access to diagnosis or diagnostic professionals are varied, few and far between in some parts of the United States and other parts of the world. And sometimes they're just out of reach financially for families too. So although the diagnosis may not have happened by age 9, we have strong studies that say children who struggle to build that phonological awareness and that ability to perceive sounds and words, you'll see it somewhat in the soft signs of how they're learning to match what you say. If they keep saying, I want to be specifically clear, or they keep saying Baschetti, and they're saying Baschetti at age 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 7, and they're still saying Baschetti, that's not cute any longer. And it's actually indicative of there's some language processing that's not happening as efficiently as we want it to happen. So that's a warning sign. So from phonology, we go to semantics. Semantics means children hear you speak first. They hear the sounds of their language. They watch your mouth move. They're looking at your mouth moving. They're trying to move their mouths as well. But then they start learning that these words have meaning. Bottle means I'm going to get some food. Ball means something red, rubber, round, and bouncy. And they start to learn the meaning of words after they actually begin to perceive the sounds of words. On the left side of the graph, it says expressive language. That's the talking skills. We're getting to be able to express. And again, this model really helps highlight for parents, dyslexia is not just a reading disorder. It starts with the speech processing system. Because in every language of the world, you speak it first, and you learn to read and spell it later on. So it's a developmental hierarchy. So it shouldn't be surprising that our number one predictor of reading skills is a spoken language perception, production, speech processing skill called phonological awareness. Have I lost you yet, Stephen? We're staying on target so far?
We're tracking.
Got it. And folks, you can pop in questions on the live stream channels, whichever channel you're on, whether you're on LinkedIn or Facebook or YouTube or X, wherever you're at. Throw in questions, and we'll actually take the time to try to answer them as we're going along.
Well,
So
let's add in if you have terminology that you keep hearing, being thrown around or used in your ARD meetings or used on Facebook and whatever else, and you want to know, is this really a term?
Yeah.
Is this a professional term for XYZ? Throw it in here and we'll try to get to it.
We'll talk through it. So that left side of that expressive language, your child starts to speak, and you see ages on the left side there. We got 9 months, 18 months, 5 years. It's building over time. On the far right side, over here on the other end, we've got receptive language. That's your child's input system. They're actually hearing the words you say, and they're beginning to build vocabulary. They understand the words you say. And typically around 12 months, 16 months, kids start producing words, and they start speaking. Ironically, you can teach children sign language around 6 to 8 months of age. So they're actually understanding language very soon after that phonological system's building. They're actually building some comprehension, but they don't have the motor control and the language access yet and the motor production to say the words yet, but they understand them, they recognize them. And if you sign, milk, or you sign cookie, or you sign, eat or more, they can sign right back to you around 8 months of age. It's a fascinating thing to do. And there's a sign with your baby programs out there that highly recommend parents look at. If you're new parents with, second child, first child, doesn't matter. All of them benefit from sign language early on, but with speech. Don't forget to talk to them at the same time. The two got to come together.
That was the most, looking back on our three boys, we started teaching sign language with Asher from the very beginning. And he was signing more 6 to 8 months time frame. And I mean, he had a lot of signs that he knew, and it made it so much more pleasant to communicate with him. And he wasn't as frustrated because he could tell us what he wanted.
Yeah. So speaking's around 12 to 18 months, but signing, like Stephen said, around 6 to 8 months of age. Many kids can learn 50 signs in just a few months, and they may not even speak hardly any words. So keep that model in mind of the brain speaking system builds first. The reading and spelling system comes later. The writing system is above that. And math is a foreign language. It's harder than all of the ones below it. So it's even higher up on our chart here. So from semantics, you get to syntax. That's word order. Kids start putting words in order when they're speaking. And if you notice that your child's having trouble holding on to 2, 3, 4 words, and they're still speaking in 1 to 2 words, and you're saying things in 5, 6, 8 words, that's another risk factor. That language system might not be building as well as it should be building, because you should see speaking skills continue to get stronger and stronger. Their sentences should be getting longer and longer, and you're building vocabulary, and they're learning from you how to put words together. They don't say, Mom, get ball, the go. They learn how to say, Mom, go get the ball, or Mom, I want the ball, after they've learned how to say ball or mom ball. So there's short phrases that get longer and longer. Typically in the US, it's not until like around age 5 that we actually really start formal instruction on letters, the written alphabet, the English alphabet, and we begin to start doing early reading skills around age 5, maybe even age 6. And those skills then should begin to develop and go on from there up. When those reading skills don't develop, that's when we get into that diagnostic category of dyslexia.
Oh, we lost Dr. Conway. He'll be back shortly. So let's continue on. We are advocating out there. Again, we have to make sure that we understand the terminology about what we're asking for. We understand the terminology about what they're telling us I won't say wrong, but what the diagnostic information that has come back from the testing is telling them. And that's the reason why we need to make sure that we understand exactly what they're saying to us.
Apologize for that. Technology is great when it works. The whole thing just crashed. So we're back. So yeah, when they get to the point when the reading problems become problematic, then we want to switch to this other model, which is looking at how do reading skills build. You've got 3 core reading skills down at the bottom of this building blocks. You've got that ability to sound out words, which means you look at the letters and the child goes, sap. There's, tree has sap, or they go it, sit. The dog will sit down, and they start to sound out words. That's one critical skill we want all individuals to build for reading skills. But let's be very, very frank about English. It's a horrible language to learn because sometimes you can sound out words, but other times you cannot sound them out. You can look at a word and say every sound, and you're going to say some funny nonsense word because the word is actually not what we call a phonetic word. It can't be sounded out. So those words like yacht or though or through are words that our brain begins to memorize as a whole word unit. And while parts of it are phonetic and the brain picks up on those phonetic parts, it begins to more memorize the recognition of what that looks like and what you say than actually using those skills to sound it out. As those 2 skills are building, and if you're learning from books, then that vocabulary system is building right along with it. Because if you start reading across the word and the page, and the page says, a BAL word, and you've been talking about, cars. It's a book all about cars. The BAL word shouldn't start you thinking of, I think it's going to be ballerina. Because if you're comprehending it, ballerinas, cars aren't really the 2 tightly connected together. Maybe it's going to be the name of a part of a car, like some ball that's a part of the car, or some, ball joint that's a part of the car. But if you aren't comprehending, your brain's going to struggle to pick up on that content that also contributes to accurate, efficient reading and is a really key piece of why we want kids reading. From those 3, we know that when you sound out words efficiently, and when your visual memory system, or what some people call orthographic mapping, we'll come back to that, are building the sight words and your vocabulary is helping you understand what's going on, you're then going to be more likely to be a more fluent reader. Caveat, barring any visual perceptual, visual tracking, visual motor difficulties that you might get diagnosed by an OT or a developmental neuro-ophthalmologist, an MD vision doctor who really knows how that visual system should be working. When those 4 are working well, then you're more likely to be able to read and have better comprehension. Albeit, another caveat, comprehension is a different part of the brain than those reading skills are. So just because you can read doesn't guarantee you understand, remember, or even can think about what you're reading. That's a different part of the brain and takes different systems to build it.
And the flip side of that also is just because you can't read doesn't mean you can't comprehend what is being spoken to you or what you hear. We have that a lot too, is really trying to tease out the difference in reading comprehension and listening comprehension. While they're both comprehension, using different areas in order to do that.
Yep, 100%. And what many parents may be faced with is, but when he reads the paragraphs, he figures it all out. He knows what's happening, even though he makes mistakes on the words. Well, that's called IQ. That's intelligence. Even though there's pieces missing in the story, the kids who have stronger vocabulary, stronger intelligence will be filling in the gaps and putting it together. So some students will score higher on reading comprehension tests and lower on actually reading tests that are just single word reading or nonsense word reading. And what that tells you is your child is using their smarts and their vocabulary knowledge to figure out what the story is talking about, and they're kind of guessing through the story. And that is not an instructional approach we want to be using. Telling kids to guess through the story does not give them fully developed reading skills. Changing their ability to sound out words and making sure they can memorize sight words well, that's going to build our skills. So those are the pieces coming together. So, Stephen, from there, I think let's jump to the diagnosis of dyslexia. What do you think?
I think so.
All right. So this is a manual that all professionals who are licensed to diagnose dyslexia, and let me make sure that parents really understand, many people are not licensed to diagnose dyslexia. So they might tell you, I'm going to do an educational eval, or some private company might say, hey, free educational testing. Your question should be, can the person doing the testing, are they state licensed to give my child a diagnosis? Because if they're not, then you're actually walking into more of a sales pitch than you are into an actual diagnostic assessment, because you're not going to leave with a diagnosis, or you're not going to leave with confidence that your child does not meet the criteria of a diagnosis, as opposed to the person you went to is not legally licensed to diagnose. And they might use terms like, your child shows dyslexic characteristics.
Or tendencies.
Or dyslexic tendencies. That's more commonly a phrase that's used by people who actually cannot diagnose, or they might be part of an entity like a school that doesn't want them diagnosing for whatever reason. So those dyslexic characteristics or dyslexic tendencies, that is meaning that someone's trying to skirt the issue of telling you yes or no, they meet the criteria of a diagnosis. Here are the 3 criteria that psychologists, speech pathologists, and others who are licensed to diagnose dyslexia would use, and that is, does the child have an impairment in word reading accuracy? Yes or no? Does the child, and I'll clarify, teenager or adult, because this diagnosis applies to any age, do they have an impairment reading rate or reading fluency? And last, they might be accurate and they might have a good fluent reading rate, but do they have a reading comprehension deficit? If you have any one of those 3 criteria, then you meet the criteria for a diagnosis of dyslexia. It doesn't mean there aren't going to be other skill struggles the child has. It just means these are the only 3 that are really required and are part of the actual true definition of dyslexia. Stephen, thoughts or comments on that diagnostic manual, DSM piece of what licensed professionals use to decide, does your child or does your child not meet the criteria for a diagnosis?
I mean, I'm going back to when we first, started our advocacy work and really understanding what was going on, or thought we were understanding what was going on. And I can't even speak now. Dyslexic tendencies or characteristics, that has typically, from what I've learned and seen now, that's when you start hearing that, the school is typically not going to give you the label of dyslexic.
Right.
Typically, that's been a loophole for them to get out of having to provide dyslexia services.
Right.
In school, is they would use, well, they have tendencies or they have characteristics, but that's where they stop. They're not going to take that next step and say, yes, they have dyslexia.
Right.
So just for our parents to understand, if you're being told that your child has tendencies or characteristics or something like that, understand what they're saying.
Yep. Now, what you'll notice here, Stephen, is there's only one word for this, and it is dyslexia. It's in that yellow box.
Mm-hmm.
This diagnostic category, it's kind of cropped off at the top. It's called specific learning disorder, and then it says with impairment in reading. Dyslexia is the alternative term for it. There are no other versions of that term in this manual. But I guarantee you, many parents have heard a lot of other common terms for dyslexia. There's one that's commonly called dyseidetic dyslexia. And dyseidetic is the professionals trying to show and explain to the parents that your child who has dyseidetic dyslexia, it's not in this manual, it's not a real, quote, legal diagnosis, is struggling more to remember the visual sight words than they are with struggling to sound out words. But both show up with impairments in reading accuracy. So your reading accuracy could be because of your visual memory, orthographic memory, visual recognition of words, more so than your ability to sound out words. And they will both give you the same impairment, which is your reading accuracy is low. But besides dyseidetic, the flip side of that is some people will call it dysphonetic dyslexia. And now with dysphonetic dyslexia, they're talking about the opposite side of this building blocks of language. not the sight word skills, not the visual orthographic memory or visual sight word memory words. They're now talking about your child struggles to sound words out. And that's the predominant cause of their word reading accuracy problems, and potentially also the predominant cause of their word reading fluency problems. Besides that, then there's also attentional dyslexia. Again, it's not part of the diagnostic manual here. It's not actually a term that has a diagnosis code that goes with it. But some people use the words attentional dyslexia to say, your kid's skipping words. They're dropping out of, for, the, from. They're substituting words. They're reading lots of words, but they just keep changing these things. And if you point to them, they read it correctly. And that means there may be more attentional difficulties that are contributing to their reading errors. But again, it's not a category. It's not a diagnosis by itself. And I know schools now in many locations are trying to tell parents, well, that's just your child's ADHD is causing his reading problems. I don't know of any high quality research study that has proven that attentional problems are a common, reliable cause of dyslexia, or if it was common that ADHD led to reading problems, that would be in the criteria of ADHD. And nowhere in the diagnosis of ADHD is the criteria of, and it can cause mistakes with words like of, for, the, from, and skipping words. So it's more of a attempt to more qualify and more thoroughly explain what they're seeing. But again, it's not a separate diagnosis, and we don't have a separate treatment for dyseidetic or a separate treatment for attentional dyslexia or a separate treatment for dysphonetic. We have treatments for dyslexia as it's defined in the DSM-5, accuracy problems, fluency problems, and comprehension problems. Stephen, that's a ton. Your thoughts about the diagnostic criteria as we try to help parents understand what is dyslexia and how it's diagnosed and what is it not?
So, as you're talking about, adding, subtracting, changing, the words as you're reading along, especially, leaving out the, from, these, the, all of those type of words. That was me growing up.
Mm-hmm.
And, you were really talking about that a lot on, the prior slide, where as you're building those building blocks of language, that, yeah, you may be able to read it in isolation, but your brain recognizes, they see that BAL when you're talking about the car, and your brain automatically jumps to ballerina, or it automatically jumps to another word, and you don't know why you said it, you don't know how you said it, you just know you said it, and it doesn't even make sense when it comes out of your mouth, or you read it and you wait a second, what did I just read? And you have to go back and read it again. So I mean, it's interesting that you were talking about that piece of it earlier.
Yeah.
Because we have to understand, dyslexia as and I remember this from when I was young and in school, they were talking about it back then, way back then, as an umbrella term, right?
Right. Yeah.
And a lot of times they try to say the same thing about ASD or autism. It's an umbrella term that means all kinds of things. However, I said this at the IDA meeting or conference here in Dallas. I choose not to give dyslexia any more power than what it, quote unquote, deserves. And I want to stick to that. And I challenge each of you listening to stick to what is dyslexia and what is not dyslexia, and how do we manage and or remediate each of those areas of struggle, even though we may be, if you want to use umbrella term, dyslexic at the top level.
Yeah.
And know that, yes, it may, like when we were looking at the building blocks of language, and how learning develops, well, it may affect multiple different areas of learning, but know that we need to take and start at the bottom and remediate those skills. And you have to know what you're faced with.
Yeah,
And if you can't put a name to it and you can't put a definition to it, how in the world are you ever going to help effectively remediate it?
exactly. And that's the goal of the diagnostic manual and these explicit criteria. And notice this is not like what you see these nonprofits doing. Nonprofits are trying to write a definition of dyslexia. The IDA has a definition of dyslexia. Somebody else makes up a definition of dyslexia. There is no point in those definitions because those things aren't part of the diagnostic criteria that professionals use to decide does an adult or does an adult not have dyslexia. Now, historically, before we got to this kind of a manual with really clear criteria, we had people just kind of giving it their best guess. And early history in the 1800s, they didn't call it dyslexia. They called it word blindness. They really thought the child just couldn't see some of the words. And that was really, a struggle. And yeah, as is on that placard, some of them even called it minimal brain damage. They thought there's something damaged about the brain's language reading system that's not working. Thankfully, no, neither of those are true. There's no blindness when there's dyslexia, and there's no brain damage. All the neurons are firing. It's not a difference of the brain's working differently. Someone with dyslexia, the left side's trying to do the reading, it's trying to sound it out, but it's not as skilled at it. And so it struggles to do it. So typically on brain imaging, we see the right side's trying to help out, but it's not very good at that. So they're actually working less efficiently, not so much differently. Because when you actually do effective dyslexia empowerment, and you change those phonological skills, you improve the ability to decode and sound out words. We have $1 million studies showing this is very possible at any age. And I'll say that again. We have $1 million research studies showing at any age you can improve reading skills and improve spelling skills if you're using a program that's been scientifically tested and proven to be effective. Sadly, about 95% of the programs out there have never been researched, never been studied. They'll call themselves research-based, which means, yes, somebody did some research about reading, and we listened to it, and we took some of what they said, and we made up a program. That's not a guarantee it's going to be effective. That's not the caliber of what parents should be looking for. So that also takes us to this other idea of another term called dyslexia superpowers. And, with dyslexia superpowers, now we're talking about, okay, do people with dyslexia have a genetic endowment for skills that people without dyslexia don't have? And it literally blows my mind that so many people are jumping on this bandwagon and saying, yeah, all dyslexics are better visual thinkers. They're all better, communicators. They're all better out of the box thinkers. They're all better problem solvers, more so than people who can read. I hate to tell you, but reading skills only enhance those same abilities. The more you read, the more knowledge you have, the more you can actually come up with other ideas to solve a problem. One statistic people like to use, it's not a very reliable statistic, it comes from a very small questionnaire kind of study, is people will latch onto these key phrases like, hey, 35% of CEOs are dyslexic. Like, okay, so you think that means they got really good reasoning, problem solving, out of the box thinking skills. But that also means 65% of CEOs are not dyslexic. So clearly, it's not dyslexia giving you an advantage or a competitive edge over someone who has reading skills. But if you've built those reasoning skills, you've built those creative ways that go around your reading deficits, and we also give you reading skills, all we've done is empowered you with more ability to think creatively, more ability to be a better problem solver. And the human brain, whether you're dyslexic or your typical reading development, has the potential for out-of-the-box thinking, empathic thinking, lateral thinking, all these popular terms that people are throwing around that typically are not scientists in the field, not licensed professionals. It's usually more laypersons trying to get the universe to shift from focusing on the things dyslexics can't do. Stephen, that'd be fine if we actually couldn't change those skills. But
so let's look at that for just a second.
Sure.
So you said What'd you say, 34%?
35% is one of the stats
35%,
people throw
whatever.
out. Yeah.
So I am one of the, and you are too,
Yeah.
one of those CEO statistics, right?
Yep.
Um,
We're both dyslexic. We both run companies. The difference between us, for those folks who are watching for the first time, is I got early evidence-based empowerment at age 5, and Stephen got it at age 45. So while I didn't struggle to read and spell, and my dyslexia was empowered at a very early age, I genetically passed it on to my kids. Both my kids had to go through the same type of intervention that I went through, back in the 70s. What is that? Some 50 years ago. Um, Stephen went through it at age 45, but had years of struggle in school before he got to that empowered reading, empowered spelling skills.
so there's two lines of thought that I look at here. One is, and like I say, the skills that people think are the superpowers, I describe them as survival skills.
Yeah.
Anybody can build these. Any human that has all their parts of their brain and it's all working, and that piece of it. But I tend to call this survival skills. And I would guarantee you, if you took a survey of the 35% of the CEOs that are dyslexic, if the people are being honest, the reason why they're a CEO or they started their own company was the same reason I did.
Yeah.
Which is, I knew I wouldn't be able to be hired by anybody else because I couldn't read and spell on a high level.
Right.
I mean, if you go look at any job description on any LinkedIn board or any job posting board anywhere, the first criteria for that position is master level or very fluent communication skills.
Or a college degree. Yeah. Or a
Or college
master's
degree.
degree. Yeah.
So you're faced with the idea of either I'm going to have to work a job or a position that doesn't require any college education, and
Right.
that I'm going to have to find somebody to take a chance on me, or forget it, I'm just going to go work for myself.
hmm
And a lot of times that's what happens.
Right.
So
Out of lack of other options available, you're
right,
making the best choice you can, not because it's what you want to do, but it's because it's what's possible for you right now. And yeah, superpowers are your survival skills, just trying to work around the difficulties. And one thing, Stephen, that we've worked with heart surgeons who had dyslexia, trauma surgeons who had dyslexia, university professors with dyslexia. Many of them say to us, after we've empowered their reading skills and empowered their spelling skills, their thought immediately goes to, just think how much more I could have accomplished if I didn't have to do all those roundabout, circuitous, extra efforts to work around my dyslexia. And I could have just gone straight through reading like everybody else did around me who didn't struggle to read and spell. I could have done so much more.
yeah, I can figure it out. I can figure out another way of how do I spell, XYZ, whatever the word is. I can work my way around it, but that's not efficient, right? When it takes you 45 minutes to an hour to write one simple email. Well, you're not going to get a whole lot done in a day.
Yeah. Or you're going to avoid sending emails. Or
Yeah.
you're going to, like, we had one woman, she would decline her promotion every year from her firm every time they tried to promote her. She'd done it 3 years in a row. And she would pretend to be graciously declining and just the thank you, but no, I really love the job I'm doing. But in her heart, and when she got home, she'd be in tears because she didn't want to take the promotion, she told us, because it required her to do public speaking, send out memos. There's a whole bunch of written, spelling, or reading skills required with that promotion that she knew then people would see that she doesn't read well, she can't spell well, and they're then going to think that she's less intelligent. And she did not want to be shamed like that. So she declined the promotion year after year, not because she didn't deserve it and didn't earn it and didn't want it, but because she did not want to be exposed to that, hurtful, shameful, disappointing environment of people seeing that she didn't have these skills that she was very embarrassed about. Now we could say, let's change the work environment. Let's make everyone just don't worry about spelling. But still, even people who get into environments like that still carry this black cloud of, because every environment you go to is not going to compensate for your spelling problems. Every place you go to in life, whether it's a restaurant or a resort or a hotel, the whole environment's not always going to adapt to you. So the best we can do for you is empower as many skills as possible, which leads to that other phrase that dyslexia is not a disorder, it's a different way of thinking. I'll let you comment on that one, Stephen, and continue with the thought you were already having.
So understanding, this really ties back into survival skills. Okay. So a different way of thinking is really saying, if you really break it down and understand what they're saying, is I'm having to compensate because I can't do something else, but I've got to get something accomplished. That's what they're saying, right? So if, I've got to dig a hole, but I don't have a shovel, I'm going to sit there and come up with any possible way. I may start digging with my hands until my hands hurt. And then I start looking for some other way of digging because I don't have a shovel. Mm-hmm. Right? So what they're actually saying is I am compensating because I don't have the ability to do the task that I'm being asked to do. Now, I'm not saying that you don't have the ability to learn how to read. I don't currently, in my current state, I don't have the ability to do what you're asking me to do. That doesn't matter if you're in kindergarten, third grade, you're a senior, you're in college, you're CEO. It means that you are overcompensating for that deficit.
Right.
And you're right. One of your superpowers becomes avoidance of those type of scenarios. You completely avoid being in an area or a situation where you're going to have to do any type of public speaking, public reading. You typically avoid going on to higher education. Mm-hmm. And I never really understood that and I was a believer in I think differently. Right. Because I'm not looking at it from the same lens, because I'm looking at it from how do I get to the other side around this rock in the road.
Yeah. You have to take a different approach.
I know that. So I'm not even going to think about the easiest path through. Right. Which would be just read the paragraph or learn to read the paragraph. I'm going to learn, how do I, jackhammer the rock? How do I dig under it? How do I, move it? Whatever, versus the easiest path is a straight line. Right.
And once we changed your reading skills, once you went through that Now program and we put you in nowprograms.com and rebuilt those phonological skills, and rebuilt your ability to sound stuff out, change your spelling skills, you're saying that's when it changed your view that dyslexia is a different way of thinking?
It's a hard concept to really wrap your brain around, because if you don't know what is actually capable of, you don't know, and I say this a lot, if you don't know what success looks like, you'll settle for anything.
Yeah.
Success could be, oh, well, today I can read cat.
Mhm.
Yes, that is success. But I want you to be able to read the entire book that the word cat is in.
Yeah.
I want you to get to the point of the joy of reading, which I thought was the most craziest term and never could understand why anybody
Who
in
would
their
pair those two words
right
together?
mind,
Joy and reading.
joy in reading, or I want to curl up next to a fire and read a good book. I was like, well, I don't know any good books. Yeah, I can get down with sitting by the fire and relaxing, but yeah, we're not reading anything. Or let's go watch this foreign film
Yeah.
with subtitles.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay.
Read through a whole movie for a year and a half. I mean, sorry,
No,
hour and a half.
yeah, it would be a year and a half for me.
Yeah, exactly.
But no, I mean that's when you really understand what they're saying. Typically, this is a lot of these things, and again, we're going through these kind of terminology that's being thrown out there. And please understand, you got to know your audience, who you're
Mm.
talking to, right? And you have to meet who you're talking with at the level that they're at,
Right.
right? You're not going to go to a elementary school kid and tell them you're not any better than anybody else. You don't have any superpowers, and you this, that, and the other, right? You want to build that courage, and you want to build that competency in them. But I heard something the other day that the basically success builds confidence.
Hmm. Yeah.
Competency, that's what it is. Competency builds success or builds confidence.
Yeah. We'll
So
say,
the more,
yeah, competence, your ability
yeah,
to do it, builds
yes,
confidence.
confidence. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely.
So the ability, and the more that we are able to teach and show you, and really you show yourself that you have the ability to learn and you have the ability to read, the more confident you're going to be at it, and you can have that superpower.
Yeah. And what Polygon's pointing out is just because you have dyslexia and it's not been improved upon, you may have good comprehension skills. And so you may be able to communicate clearly, but unfortunately, some folks have both deficits because those three criteria of dyslexia is poor reading accuracy, poor reading speed, or poor comprehension. You may actually have poor reading and poor comprehension. And then you're a dyslexic person who's at an even larger disadvantage. So it's understanding how those pieces all work together.
So a good visual on this is: have you ever seen a bodybuilder that has a huge upper body? I mean, they have 25-inch arms. Their neck is like this. Their chest is like Adonis, and they come walking out in their shorts, and they have some strings hanging off from the bottom of their shorts, which is their legs.
So bird legs.
Yeah, so that's what we're talking about. You forgot to do leg day, right?
Yeah.
So that's what we're talking about here. We overcompensate or we overwork out these other areas in our lives because we're not doing leg day.
Right. And
We're
scientifically, yeah, and
Yeah.
here's how we describe it from brain science. We say it's called experience builds brain wiring. We call it experience-dependent neuroplasticity. If somebody gives you training in German, your brain's never going to build the wiring for listening to German, speaking German, reading, spelling, and writing German if you don't get the experience and the practice. That's what the factor is of how the brain works. So if you're dyslexic and you spend and you realize early on that if I make a movie in my head, I understand more, and you keep practicing making a movie, you've actually built that out-of-the-box thinking skill. That experience-dependent neuroplasticity is you had so many hours and so many months and years of practicing it, you built that skill. It wasn't genetically just given to you from birth. So that's why we say dyslexia doesn't guarantee superpowers, but certainly some dyslexics can build them. Now, number one response I have to the superpower phenomena is go to the prisons and talk to the men and women in prison and ask them, because 50 to 80% of them can't read. And it may be part genetic dyslexia, part poor environmental experience. There could be other causes of the reading deficit, but none of them are going to tell you they had superpowers because they had reading problems. That's kind of why they're where they're at. They made some poor choices because they didn't have other opportunities.
Well,
But
there's
Steve,
there's a saying out there that dyslexia is a superpower unless you're poor.
yeah, it's true. Yeah.
So I mean that kind of goes along the same lines.
Yep.
Which is another piece of it is it's the amount of support that you can get around you.
Yeah.
Really will help determine the amount of success that these people are going to have also.
Exactly.
Especially without any type of remediation support underneath.
Yep.
So
I agree. So we've got about 5 minutes left, Stephen. I got a list of about 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 15 more words.
let's run through them.
And for parents who have just joined us to know, here's the terminology we've already covered. We covered specific learning disorder. We covered stealth dyslexia. Well, actually, no, we didn't. Stealth dyslexia is people say they were covering it up for so long, we didn't find it out till later on. And usually that's the kids who are really good with high IQs, or what they call twice exceptional kids. They hid it for so long, for so well, because they could comprehend and understand the information. They used it to survive and work around it, and it just didn't get identified. We could have picked it up at age 4 if we were screening all kids for phonological processing. We didn't talk about double deficit dyslexia. Double deficit dyslexia means you have poor phonological skills, poor ability to sound out words, and you really struggle to retrieve words quickly and easily. So even though you just read a word in one paragraph, 3 lines or 2 paragraphs later, you're going to see the same word, and your brain's struggling to remember, what did I say last time? What was that word? And you basically have to start all over like you've never seen it before. And you've got both a retrieval naming deficit and the phonological deficit together. We know that that's not a diagnostic criteria, but it's a qualifying description of some of the struggles that somebody has. Not everyone with dyslexia has that double deficit. We talked about dyslexia characteristics. We talked about dyseidetic dyslexia, dysphonetic dyslexia, attentional dyslexia, word blindness, dyslexia superpowers. And we showed models of how the brain builds reading skills. And this is one of the models. And let's clarify, this bottom half of this model is all about speech language skills. So when someone says to you that the dyslexia program they want to give your child is a speech to print program, they're telling you it's developmentally designed just like how the brain typically learns to read and spell. It works on the spoken language skills first, down here at the bottom, of sounding out sounds, hearing sounds, perceiving sounds, repeating words, and judging those 5 changes that can happen in words, which are add, omit, substitute, shift, or repeat sounds in words. And it's going to build those skills first. Later, it's going to get to the alphabet letters and get to the actual reading and spelling skills. If somebody tells you they're going to use a phonics program, because phonics is so important, and they're right, it is, but developmentally, nobody starts building language skills from written words. So phonics are called a print to speech program. It's going from higher level skills down to the earlier foundational skills. It's not how the brain typically builds skills. So it shouldn't be surprising to hear that most phonics programs do not work well with 5-year-olds, but speech to print programs are tremendously powerful for 5-year-olds. And the same can be true of 10, 15, and 20-year-olds. So all those pieces together. Another common term is talking about processing speed. Some parents say, oh, the psychologist told me my kid is slow processing. Usually if you ask them, but what tasks were they slow on? And were they slow on every test you gave them? And if the psychologist, speech pathologist, or other professional says to you, no, they were only slow on these 2 parts of the IQ test that we call processing speed, those 2 parts of the IQ test are actually just the visual motor task. So it's really not that your child's slow at processing information. They've got some visual motor struggles, and you need to go see an occupational therapist who's specially trained in sensory integration. All dyslexic kids do not have processing speed deficits. And all kids and adults with dyslexia do not struggle to use visual motor skills. It also shouldn't be surprising that if you have poor phonological processing, that sound-based system, it's not going to be uncommon that you have poor working memory. You can't hold on to phone numbers. You can't hold on to street addresses. You can't remember people's names. Well, if you struggle to hold on to a word and split it apart to its sounds, that's the foundation for auditory memory. Working memory means you're going to manipulate it. If you can't even hold on to it and it's gone, there's no chance to manipulate it. So it's not uncommon to see working memory struggles in individuals with dyslexia, but it's also not uncommon to see those working memory pieces get stronger as you change those foundational skills. One other popular term that we'll end up with, Stephen, that's orthographic mapping. It's really popular now today. People are talking about orthographic processors, orthographic mapping. That's really talking about your visual processing system of how the brain back here and up here stores words that you have to learn by sight. And it also begins to store words that you've sounded out. Once you sound it out, let's go with flop, or you sound it out slap, hopefully your brain doesn't have to sound it out the next time you see it. So you want the brain to begin to store words by memory. It's a faster system. And that phonological system down here supports that visual memory system up here. The two support each other and grow, and you want both to be equally strong. So we've hit a whole bunch of terminology, all about dyslexia, learning disabilities, with the goal of helping families understand some of these terms are not part of diagnosis whatsoever. They'll tell you nothing about what to do. They give a little bit more description of the quality of how your child or how you as an adult with dyslexia are showing strengths and also showing weaknesses. But the ultimate question becomes, what do you do about it? And that's something we've covered on a different podcast on a different time. Stephen, your thoughts of wrapping up? How do we actually help parents know, listen to the terms, understand the terms, and use that knowledge to help you be a better consumer and ask better questions, not only of the school, but also of the professionals who are doing independent assessments or evidence-based treatment, like nowprograms.com does evidence-based online empowerment for dyslexia, as does the morecenter.com. Those are two companies that I work with that help build those skills anywhere around the world and help empower individuals with stronger reading and spelling.
I can't tell you how important it is in really any aspect in life to understand the terminology or what it is that people are saying when you're having to deal, going to these type of meetings. I mean, it doesn't matter if it's a dyslexia terminology and you're going into an ARD meeting, or you're going into a business meeting, and the culture there is they speak in acronyms all the time, just trying to understand what it is that they're talking about. And then once we understand that, going to understanding for me, it helps me read between the lines a lot of times when having to deal with school systems and helping parents understand how to deal with school systems. And the more that we can help empower, really do knowledge transfer to our parents that are out there, ultimately does nothing more than helps you become the best advocate for your child and others, really. Because, look, it doesn't take us any more effort to advocate for our own kids than it does, or for all kids, than it does take to advocate for all kids. So what we're doing is helping you become a better advocate, helping you and your child become the best versions of yourself and them of themselves, to make sure that we're able to move forward, and you don't have to go through that struggle. And ultimately, that's what it's about. We want to make sure that our kids and grandkids, and when I say kids, it's a collective kids. It's a we as a collective we. All of the kids out there are our kids, right? They're our future. So the more that we can help them not have to unnecessarily struggle is really the goal.
Yeah, 100%. Well said, Stephen. Appreciate all the listeners who've joined in, those who have put comments on the feed as well. We've pushed out some links to more information as well. And next week, we'll have another podcast. And this week, it will be another dyslexia success story. We're talking to kids who've had empowerment, teenagers who had empowerment, 20-year-olds. We've had 70-year-olds on who we actually put online with nowprograms.com and empowered their reading, empowered their spelling. And so join us next week. But that podcast is at noon Eastern time. And you'll get to hear firsthand from someone who actually made that progress themselves, talk about their dyslexia success. In 2 weeks, we'll be back again with another dyslexia discussion with a new topic. And we want to start actually getting more parents to send in an opportunity to have your child's data reviewed and discussed online. We'll anonymously share your child's evaluation. We'll talk it over, talk about what it means to this from the scientist perspective, talk about what the recommendations you've received and what other recommendations you might consider, and use that as another way to actually help, by example, help empower parents to be better consumers and make better choices to get empowerment for your child, teenager, college student, sibling, or even your spouse, or even your parent, your 70-year-old father who still can't spell and it bothers him. He wants to change that. That's possible as well. Stephen, thanks again. We'll see you in 2 weeks, and everyone have a great weekend.
Take care.